Hi, everyone, and good morning. Thank you for joining us on our webinar today. Our webinar titled The Intersection of Grid Congestion and Storage Deployment. We're very happy to be talking about this interesting topic on storage, and particularly for the Netherlands. And I have two great speakers on the line who have a great presentation lined up. So let me jump right in with the agenda for today so that we can kick things off with the presentation. To give you some context, my name is Lorena Nieuwenhoven, and I'm a project manager at Solarplaza. And after a brief introduction, we will have a presentation from Gim Ringers, a consultant at Leander, and Lars Rupert, a founding partner and CFRO at Giga Storage, who will be further introduced later on. Please note, after their presentations, we will be very happy to answer your questions at the Q&A following a discussion with both speakers. And with that, we will close the webinar of today. For a bit of an introduction, and for those who don't know Solarplaza, we are a platform for solar professionals, and our mission is to positively impact the world by accelerating the sustainable energy transition. We do this by hosting conferences throughout the world and sharing content like this webinar and connecting our database of over 60,000 PV professionals. So thank you for being one of those. And on another note, during these 2 years of pandemic, we haven't sat still. We have also launched a side consultancy, which feel free to check out if you would like to have some market and business intelligence tailor-made for your company. Now, before we really do jump into our presentations, I would like to know that we do have some practical notes. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A chat box that you'll find on your panel. And if you have any technical issues, feel free to use the Q&A or the chat box. We have a team of technical experts with us to help you if there's any issues with your audio or stuff like that. And we will be sharing all the slides and the recordings after the webinar has taken place. Now, I would like to introduce one of our speakers of today, Lars Rupert, who is the CFRO of Giga Storage and the Chief Financial Risk Officer. He has extensive legal experience in structuring and M&A, and he co-founded Giga Storage in 2018. They have realized the 2 largest batteries in the Netherlands, and at our conference, Solarplaza Summit Energy Storage Netherlands, on the 29th of March, he will be sharing his lessons on the session, Lessons Learned from Successful Project Development. We also have on the line Gim Ringers, a consultant at Leander, who has dual focuses, one on the role of energy storage in the energy system, which he will be definitely talking about today, as well as the integral energy system planning with stakeholders. He has a background in chemical engineering at TU Delft, and at the conference, he will be diving deeper into the topic of grid congestion management. And I would actually like to call him up to the floor to turn his camera on so that he can kick things off with his presentation. Thank you so much, Gim. Take it away.
Yes, good morning, everybody, and thanks, Lorena, for the introduction. So, and thanks, Solarplaza, for inviting me to speak today on the typical causes and possible solutions for grid congestion. And we'll do that by covering 3 main topics. So first, I will describe the typical causes of grid congestion, followed by the main solutions that we see, being mainly grid reinforcements and congestion management. And then we'll zoom in specifically on the role of energy storage. And I will describe some challenges for using and deploying energy storage and the possible solutions to these challenges that we're working on. First, a little bit introduction about Leander. Leander is one of the 3 main large grid operators, regional grid operators in the Netherlands. We're active in 5 provinces that you can see in the area on the right in the map. In the blue area, we supply energy and gas. We distribute electricity and gas and maintain that infrastructure. In the purple areas, we do that only for electricity. To give you an idea, some numbers. So in total, we maintain 91,000 kilometers of electricity cable, mainly underground. Then also gas infrastructure is declining. The electricity infrastructure is growing, obviously, but still once around the world gas infrastructure. We have around 50,000 of these, probably familiar with you, transformer substations, and we have over 300 large electricity stations connected to the high voltage grid or other voltage levels. We're active in 145 municipalities, have around almost 6 million customers, both electricity and gas connections, and both small consumers and small businesses, also large consumers and producers, and we have around 7,500 employees. So I will describe a little bit how the grid is actually built up, because it's relevant information when I describe the causes and the solutions to grid congestion. So in the electricity system, electricity is centrally produced mostly by gas and coal-fired power plants, and more decentralized also in neighborhoods and also in other areas. New solar and wind farms are deployed, but generally it's produced centrally, then transported by TenneT, the high voltage grid operator, by the extra high voltage and high voltage networks. And there's the coupling with the grid of Liander at the 150 and 110 kV voltage level, where it's transformed into medium voltage, mainly being 10 kV, 10,000 volts and 20,000 volts, and then distribute across towns and cities, and distribute it to even lower voltage levels, familiar level 400 volts. So where are most of the clients connected to the grid? Well, it depends. The grid capacity of the connection determines where a project will be connected to the grid. So if you zoom into neighborhoods, there we find mainly smaller connections to the grid. So they're from 0 kilowatts up to 55 kilowatts are all connected to the low voltage network. Then the somewhat larger projects, and you should think about smaller solar farms or rooftop solar, they are all connected to the medium voltage network. So this is between 160 kilowatts and 2 megawatts, and everything above 2 megawatts is connected directly to a high voltage, medium voltage transformer substation. And then you should think about larger wind farms and solar farms, larger than 2 megawatts, their own electricity connection to the high voltage, medium voltage grid. Looks like that. All right, then let's go to the next slide. So briefly, our mission: we are driven by the social importance of keeping energy reliable, affordable, and accessible for everyone. And we'll in a minute describe why this is under huge stress due to the developments in the energy transition, the digitalization, the economic growth, everything that's coming together right now. So what developments do we see? We see large developments of solar farms. We see rooftop solar, both small scale and large scale. We see the development of electrical mobility, cars, also trucks. We see a large amount of digitalization. So also this webinar, well, should be processed all those data, and we see many more demand for digitalization, data center connections to the grid. Also wind energy, agricultural developments, LED lighting, etc. And then we also have the ambitious target in the Netherlands to build 1 million new homes up to 2030. All have to be connected to the grid, and these are all off the gas already, new built homes, so they possess solar panels, heat pumps, often also electric mobility, which all come together on the electricity grid. So here's a small picture only of a part of the province of North Holland, where we also see that subsidies, so the incentives for solar energy mainly lead to a large demand for transport capacity, and also other developments as wind energy. But the main driver for a lot of demand for transport capacity origins from this solar energy. So some numbers to give you an idea how fast this is all growing. I have some numbers for wind and solar energy. Well, for wind energy, we're looking at a 67% increase over the last 10 years. And that's already quite a dramatic number, but not as dramatic as it is for solar energy, where we saw a 100-fold increase in the amount of solar energy that's connected to the grid of Liander, which is currently speaking already almost 5 gigawatts. And I think the next few months and years ahead with these high prices, this will go only even faster. if there is enough grid capacity and enough solutions to integrate all that solar energy to the grid. We also saw a 15-fold increase in the number of roofs that are covered by solar panels already on the national level. And as I already mentioned briefly, the electricity grid becomes under high tension because of all these developments that come together. And more often, for regional newspapers, but also the national press, is giving a lot of attention, and I think rightfully so, because the accessibility and the affordability of the electricity grid, they come also under stress. So it's more difficult, and I think there are many solar developers in this call already struggling with the problems of grid congestion, where the energy transition is actually slowed down and the economic growth because of grid congestion that originates from all these developments. And on a map, it looks like this. I think many people are familiar with this map, and it's growing as an oil spill over the country where we suffer from congestion. This is the combined map of all the grid operators in the Netherlands. On the left, we see the congestion for consumption from the grid. So there's two types of congestion: for consumption from the grid and for feed into the grid, for instance, solar and wind energy. And we see that, well, a large part is already covered in red and orange color, which means there's no or almost no capacity left to connect to the grid. And for feed-in, it's even worse. So you see that in many areas, actually there's more areas where there's no feed-in problems, more around Amsterdam and more in the dense populated areas, where it's difficult to realize a solar farm to connect to the grid, but mainly in the remote areas of the Netherlands, it's red and orange in many places, and it will continue to be so for the next couple of years, as we'll describe. And it's not only in the networks of Liander and other regional grid operators, but also already on the high voltage level. So TenneT already in the orange areas, Utrecht, North Brabant, Gelderland, Flevoland, Friesland. They're also suffering in their assets from congestion problems. So they're actively looking for using the mechanism of congestion management right now. So shortly, different types of grid congestion. So yeah, how does it appear, the grid congestion? Well, there's three main types of grid congestion. The first one is the most common one, is the capacity limit. Means the cable is actually too thin, cannot transport so much energy in such a short time, and therefore bottlenecks arise. And that mainly affects now the, as we call it, AC4 to AC6 customers. So there's large scale customers from 55 kilowatt to much larger than 2 megawatt, which cannot feed into the grid or take electricity from the grid because of a lack of grid capacity. And in the future, we expect that also in the LV, low voltage network, this can also, even for consumers, pose new problems in the future. And this holds both for Liander, but also for TenneT that has assets with these capacity issues. Then there's a second one, it's issues to connect physically to the grid. And this is only for, as you maybe recalled from one of the first slides, the largest consumers, they have their own connection to the grid. But in many of our substations, you see that all the available plugs already taken. So it's not physically possible to connect to the grid. And we have to increase the number of plugs on such a station. It can take several years. And then there's over and under potential limits. This already affects also small consumers. So if you have a cable and in the end of the cable, when there's solar energy, the potentials, they can become too high for the over potential limit, for the potential limits. And when it's, for instance, heat pumps, electric vehicles, or other businesses, the potential become too low, which is all stated in the net code Electriciteit for power quality. This can also become a problem. And then we have a fourth option, and that's the combination of issues, which we often see. So it's not only capacity problems, but also a over potential problem, for instance, or you can also not connect to the grid. And what we also see is that it's at multiple levels. So it's both at TenneT level, but also in the step from high voltage to medium voltage, and even in medium voltage. So all these voltage levels affect each other as well when it comes to grid capacity. So what can we as grid operators do? Well, we work on several solutions for alleviating the grid congestion. So the first option, obviously, is to increase the grid capacity, including all the boundary conditions necessary for that. So we're trying to recruit more personnel, new long duration contracts with contractors. We try to increase the speed at which we can follow all procedures for increasing the grid capacity. It's also a good solution to look at how we can use the existing grid more efficiently, which then in fact brings down the demand for grid capacity. And we also look at how can we bring this better together by better programming of initiatives requiring grid capacity together with our stakeholders. So when it comes to grid reinforcement, well, what we already do, we invest in structural grid reinforcements, quite a large scale. For the first time, we invested over 1 billion euros only this year, which is already almost double than what we invested 5 years ago. So these investments are rapidly rising, and it's necessary also in the long run. Well, these projects have a long duration generally. We need long procedures. There's a lack of space, lack of technical personnel, more and more often also of materials, and increasing costs and everything that comes with that. So it takes very long. Generally, this period of grid reinforcements therefore takes, well, and it comes for low voltage, medium voltage, 1 to 2 years. But already for the medium voltage and even the high voltage network especially can last up to 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 years. And for TenneT already is looking at grid reinforcement for the high voltage network over 8 years, maybe even 10 to 11 years in some regions. So this is much longer than the general timeline for solar or wind projects. And that is what we call grid congestion. Here's some numbers where you can, from our annual year report of 2021, and you can see from these numbers that the amount of electricity cable that we put new in the ground increased by 30% in 1 year. The new transformer houses, 12% increase, new customers to the grid plus 10%, while increasing reliability. So people were only on 21 minutes on average without electricity. You see these numbers already getting very general. So we are increasing the grid capacity at a really rapid rate, and it's increasing every year despite the challenges of the lack of technical personnel and materials. In 2015, so we performed a study with the grid operators together, 1.5 to 2.5 more grid capacity than these days will be needed to facilitate the entire energy transition, the economic growth, digitalization, everything that comes with that. So we need to do a lot of grid reinforcement. But at the same time, we can also use the grid more efficiently. And we call that congestion management. So in the time between we finish doing these grid reinforcements, we can use the mechanism of congestion management, where we actually procure flexibility from the market. We organize as grid operator a market, and we reduce the peak demand during the peaks, which means that less transport capacity is needed, and new customers can already be connected to the grid maybe 5 years earlier before the grid reinforcements are realized. And the next few years, I think a lot can well be improved with using congestion management, and we will gain a lot of experience using that mechanism. And I think also for solar developers, this will become a very interesting market, and also for energy storage. Well, I already mentioned energy storage. There's multiple technical solutions that can help using congestion management. So for production, it can be curtailment. Vehicle to grid is also a solution. Combined heat and power, demand response. I was asked in this webinar to also zoom in a little bit on the role of batteries. And just to be complete, the third thing that we can do is better programming of initiatives together with stakeholders. So when we came from the recession, the demand for transport capacity was actually coming down. Now we have everything at the same time: energy transition, economic growth, data centers, new built homes, which we can only realize together. So with intensive collaboration, and we do that for renewable energy, for instance, within the rest of regional energy strategies. Well, due to time, not elaborate too much on that now. All right, so the role of battery storage in relation to grid congestion. So our customers, what can they do, new and existing, in decreasing the demand for grid capacity? Well, obviously they can try to prevent high peak loads on the electricity grid. So everything you prevent, you don't have to solve. What they can also do is solve the problem by actively participating in congestion management. We did a little study on how energy storage can be integrated into solar energy farms. And we already have agreements in the sector to use 30% curtailment, therefore already requiring less grid capacity. And we think that with 10 to 30% of the peak power of a solar farm with energy storage, the required grid capacity can come down with at least 50%, which already requires much smaller grid connections. It's easier to connect those to the grid. Well, why isn't that already happening? We see many challenges. I will only describe the challenges from the grid operator point of view. I think Lars in a minute will also describe extensively the other bottlenecks regarding business cases and financiability for financing for battery systems. Well, the first one that we see is that depending on how the battery is used, they actually don't require less, but even more grid capacity. And this has to do with that generally a solar farm only has a connection to feed into the grid, but batteries, because they're also active in the ancillary services market, which is the most important source of income for batteries, need to charge their battery also outside of hours where the sun is shining, and therefore require to take electricity from the grid, which in many cases, already showed you the map, is not possible because there's no grid capacity for taking electricity from the grid. So can actually require more grid capacity, and we need to arrange that in a way using new contract forms. I will briefly describe that later, to incorporate energy storage near solar energy parks. Then there's the energy content of batteries. It's now optimized for ancillary services and therefore not always sufficient in solving the congestion. So a typical solar farm maybe can have up to 6 hours of peak power, at least too much power to feed into the grid, while batteries generally have a capacity that's optimal for 1 to 2 hours. So there's still a difference in time between the capacity that is in the battery and the capacity that is needed. Then there's the cost and market readiness compared to other means of flexibility. So we have a flexibility market, a congestion management we're using in Readiness, and this is an area where many agricultural parties are involved. There's already combined heat and power plants there, and they're already competitive, cost competitive, and already existing forms of flexibility that can deliver that already in an economical way. So there's a competition going on with other technologies as well. And then we see that co-location is preferred by us because we want to, at the same time, reinforce the grid, not just procuring flexibility all the time, paying that for the services, but also invest in structural grid reinforcements. So if we try to connect batteries to the grid, we are actually making new connection points with cost technical personnel that's not working on the reinforcement of the behind lying grids. So it's not always possible or convenient for developers, but there is a preferential location from our perspective to put the battery together with the solar farm. And then there's also the first come first served. Many of you probably heard of it, is that grid operators have to distribute the grid capacity in the first come first served way, and it's not possible to grant these batteries a priority over other initiatives, whilst they can maybe solve the entire waiting line that for other parties that are on the waiting list. So this is still not possible, especially under European regulation, and very difficult to challenge this principle. So what do we do to overcome these challenges? So the first, and I think most important one, is that we're developing new types of contracts. These contracts have lower availability, so not the 24/7 capacity that you're probably used to when you contract capacity at a grid operator, but they have sort of time frames, and that can come with reduced cost, which is very important because the transport costs are very high for batteries, and still one of the bottlenecks that Lars will probably zoom in on. And we're thinking about contracts where it's, for instance, not possible to charge between the morning and the evening hours, because there's a high load in the grid. So you can only discharge your battery or not use it at those times. During the day, when there's solar production, you can actually charge it, but not discharge your battery up to the limit of the grid connection. And what you outside of those hours in the night, you have a unlimited capacity. There's a lot of capacity left in the other hours where you can actually deliver ancillary services, for instance. So we think this type of contracts might be a good solution for integrating storage and other flexible assets into the solar energy parts. Then we are increasing the applicability of congestion management. I already told we only do that in Readiness right now, and we're the only grid operator actually using it already besides TenneT. And the applicability for regional grid operators is still very low. We're now working together with the ACM, our supervisor, and other involved market parties, how we can increase the applicability of congestion management. And actually, there's a new proposition already. Expect a lot of it in the rest of 2022, the rest of this year. So I think it's very interesting for solar developers to participate in such market. Well, then we're actively lobbying for changing the first come first serve principle, not only for batteries, very general. It's also not something we can explain, that we cannot connect houses to the grid, or that we cannot connect a hospital, but we can connect a gambling hall, for instance. But we are not the ones to say that. It's the government that has to come with the right way of designing such a system. Then what we also already do is actively participate, and we also invite you to do that in conversations with new and existing customers, how they can integrate a battery storage in such a way that it actually helps the grid, helps alleviate the grid congestion. Well, then some key remarks that I would like to stress for you as mainly solar developers, probably maybe also some wind developers, is the first one, very important, to optimize grid connections in several ways, both existing and new connections. It's a good idea to start thinking about how to cable pool solar and wind energy, to combine solar energy with other local flexible energy use, preferably during the day, or steerable, flexible, that you can use electricity when the sun is shining, to use active curtailment strategies, place them in east-west direction rather than south, and co-locate battery storage with existing or new solar projects. Also, it's a very good idea to start thinking about how to integrate these time frame contracts I just shortly described, how to integrate that into your business case. Also, to start developing propositions for participating in congestion management, which becomes a very interesting market in, well, the rest of this year. It starts developing, and I think in the coming years will become a market with significant size. And also think about adding storage to existing and new solar wind projects. Well, this was my presentation. Looking forward to the discussions and questions that you might have in the end. And I will now give the word back to Lorena.
Hi, everyone. Please let me know if you can hear me. I got some comments that there was some issue with my audio, and we've made some adjustments, but I hope that it's fixed now. Thank you, Joachim, for your presentation. And indeed, we have some questions popping in, and we'll answer them after the discussion. For now, I would like to give the floor to Lars. Lars, you feel free to take it away.
Yeah. Thank you, Lorena, and thank you also very much for allowing me to present on the Solarplaza Summit. I will first give a short introduction on Giga Storage, and after that go into the grid and also into the business models for energy storage. I see that I don't have the presentation button yet, so it's not yet reacting. So can you...
Lars, could you give it a try?
Yeah, it's now to the next slide. So Giga Storage, we are a company that is founded in 2018, and our mission statement is that we are the missing link for the energy transition. So we are here that we want to be helping in the energy transition. That's our really our objective and our goal. And our ultimate goal actually is to set out to phase out the coal and the gas plants. So we want to attribute to that one. In our company, we combine four competencies. That's an IT platform, our energy trading expertise, our management and our development of the energy storage assets. And our goal is that we have 2 gigawatts of projects in the Netherlands in 2030 and 1 gigawatt in other countries. So we are ambitious, and we have set our goals very clear in that one. Let's see if it goes to the next slide. It's not reacting yet on my, yeah, it is slowly. So as I understood, as I explained earlier, we are founded in 2018. We have realized our first project, that is the Giga Rhino. That is an energy storage battery in Lelystad of 12 megawatt. And that is the most powerful battery of the Netherlands in 2020 when it became operational. All our batteries we are naming after protected animals. So we started with the big 5, that is the rhino, and behind me you see an elephant, and that will be one of our future projects with a large battery than this one. The battery has become, the Giga Rhino battery is connected to the Rhino wind farm. And that is a wind farm in Lelystad that is owned by the Wageningen University and is located in a smart grid. And we can charge the battery from the from the wind production of that Rhino wind farm. And with that, we save a lot of transportation costs, but I will come on that one a bit later. At this moment, we have closed our second deal. I don't have the controls over the slide, so if you can go to the next slide.
Hi, Lars. We are working on getting the slides, but for some reason there's a delay.
Yeah.
The slides are being switched, but I wonder why they're not showcasing on the screen.
Yeah. Well, then
we'll check it here, but yeah, feel free to keep going.
Yeah. So we closed last year our second battery, and it's being built right now. And that actually is the Giga Buffalo. The Giga Buffalo is connected to the wind farm, the Mammoettocht. And the Mammoettocht is, yeah, here you have the visual. The Mammoettocht is next to the Neushoorntocht, which is the Rhino wind farm. So these batteries are also next to each other. The battery we have leased out for 15 years to the energy company Eneco, and they will deploy it in the energy markets. I'm trying to get to the next slide. Yeah, this is already where Giem was talking about. So the left picture you saw with the congestion map of the Netherlands, which is all red and orange and yellow for the Netherlands. At the same time, if you could go to the next slide. We have an ambitious goal in the Netherlands. So in 2030, we want to realize 35 terawatt hours of renewable production. And we want to put 3.5 more solar and wind on land. At the on the other side, on the consumption side, we have an electrification of industry, mobility, and built environment. And to match this one, the grid companies want to invest 40 billion till 2030. There is already a shortage, and if you can go to the next slide. We predict that the full map in the Netherlands will be coming to red. We are speeding up the energy transition this quickly that, because of law and because of how the energy map is done right now, the grid companies won't be able to match the speed that we are facing into the energy transition right now. Tom, if you can go to the next slide. Yeah, then from the business case, the great barrier that we are meeting right now. Giem was already referring to it, that I would mention it. And for us, the greatest barrier are the transportation costs. If you have a grid connected battery right now, you're paying up to 35,000 euros, from 35,000 euros up to 65,000 euros per megawatt installed per year. And that tickets, those costs are split in two tickets. One is for an annual contract, and the other one is for the monthly contract. So for the annual contract, you're paying what is your maximum grid consumption in one time in the year, and for the second one is the maximum grid connection that you use on a monthly period. So that is approximately 4.55% of your maximum that you use in that month, of 4.5% of the total cost. If you compare to what you can earn with or what your total cost is for the battery, if you are in the 65,000 euros per megawatt on an annual basis, that is approximately 80% of all your operational costs on an annual basis. Where the grid operators, at least some teams within the grid operators, are very liberal and they want to change this one, and they see that batteries can help the grid to stabilize and to get a more efficient use of the grid. They are not always allowed to do that because the transportation costs are fixed in the law, and they are supervised by the Dutch ACM supervisor. So they are not allowed to step away from that one. Actually, this is the biggest barrier for us as an operator for batteries. Tom, could you go to the next slide? So if you look at the transportation cost, with our Rhino battery, we are in smart grid and we are charging from the wind farm. And if you're not in such a location, but you are with solar, for example, you are limited in what you can charge from the solar production. And if you compare it, for example, a wind farm has 3,000 production hours, 3,000 to 4,000. So there's a lot of more production where you can make use of. If you would charge from a solar farm only has 900 to 1,000 production hours on an annual basis. It has not happened that the sun is shining in the middle of the night. So at that moment, you can't charge your battery for free. There are all kinds of business models that you still can use to make to deploy your batteries, and the most optimal one would be that you use the battery to delay your feed-in on the national grid. So you charge your battery from the solar production, and at a later time, at higher prices, you put it on the grid. Normally, when all solar is producing, then the prices are low, so you get lower remuneration for your solar park. So you want to put that in a battery and put it later with higher prices on the grid. CE Delft, together with TKI and Enexis, has made an extensive study of that one that is presented last year. And actually the outcome is with the current business models and with the current approach of the Dutch government, batteries with solar parks just on a delay feed-in is not profitable because the delta between the feed-in price and when you want to put or the price at the moment of the production and when you want to put it into the grid, that is too low. If you could go to the next slide, Tom, for me, please. So you are looking to deploy the battery on other markets. So that is on one hand the trading markets which you can use, like the index, the day ahead, Apex spot market. And on the other hand, you also have capacity markets like the FCR market and the AFFR market. The difficulty is that if we go to large-scale batteries, the FCR market is rather limited. So that is an auction on Europe level, where in total for the full Europe, there is 1.4 gigawatts of power needed. But in the Netherlands, we are looking for a minimum of 34 megawatts of power and a maximum of 110. When we started with the Rhino battery, there was 35, 36 megawatt bid in every day on that market. But at this moment, there is already 85, 86 megawatt on a daily basis that is bid in on the FCR market. And well, later this year, also our Buffalo battery of 25 megawatt will become operational. So with that, actually that FCR market is full. The imbalance market that is actually in the quarter of delivery, when production and the consumption is going on, you want TenneT has the tool to adjust, and that market, nobody actually knows how big that market is. That is also a complication for battery storage and for all other flex deployments, that you don't know with the adding of new flexibility when that market will end. So you really have to have a vision and an outlook for a longer term if you want to be sure how to deploy your battery. Tom, if you can go to the next slide. So if you compare the business model from solar to storage, if you look at solar, at least how we look at it, when you look at the income side from solar, you have the SDE in the Netherlands that gives a guaranteed income per produced kilowatt hour for 15 years long with one additional banking year, 16th year. You have the PPA income with your balancing responsible party that you conclude, and you have income from your guarantees or origination. So in fact, the SDE subsidy works as a contract for differences, and that makes it a hedge from floating income to fixed income. And because solar gets that fixed income, it is infrastructural, and financing parties, banks, give you a very high loan to value. We even see a 95% senior financing with very low interest rates. I've even understood that some parties are working at 1 or less than 1% per interest per annum. And that's also because you get a discount on the financing for green bonds because you produce green energy. So that means that in fact there is it's seen as a low risk investment, and you have a high or a fixed return for the investor, and at least a higher return for the developer. And the investors that are looking into this type of asset are risk-averse type of investors like pension funds, infrastructural funds with pension money behind it. And that is completely different than where the storage market is at this moment, at least. There is no fixed income. You don't know what you will make tomorrow, unless at least you don't know what you will make in 15 years' time. And a battery you put there for 20 years. You have to finance on an volatile income that depends per season, that depends per day, per week, per month. It is floating, and also you don't have an outlook for the 15 years term. Also, the investments are rather high still, and they will be, because there are additional investments in transformers and inverters needed, in construction needed, that are really much higher than for solar plants. In a few years, we expect that that banks will step in with senior financing, but that will be at higher rates than right now with solar. And also, you don't get a discount for green bonds. So you have a higher risk asset, and in the future, we expect that you will receive higher returns. But at this moment, it is really to get a place into the market. And with that, you also are looking for other type of investors. And after you have developed an energy storage asset, you can't turn it over to the investment fund, because they will see it as they will participate it as a higher risk asset. Tom, if you can go to the next slide. And still, we know that for solar parks, and also for wind, the storage will create added business. So you have cost savings on the connection. You can use the connection better. You have the possibility to increase the renewable generation. And also you can put more solar capacity on a smaller connection. From time to time, you can optimize the delayed feed-in, but that's too much of a time you can't. And then another play comes in. There you need to have another vision and also other models with an IT platform and with all kinds of things in which you can deploy the battery into the markets. Tom, if you can go to the next slide. And that's where we believe that we have added value. So we can develop, invest, and manage the storage business case. We have the access to those markets. We have access, we have our own IT platform. So we have the algorithms to deploy it in the market. We have the machine learning on and the artificial intelligence on when the battery needs service, or how we can deploy the battery in a maximum result. For us, it's our purpose of our company. So that's why, well, we think that it is a different type of business than solar, but I think the two business cases should be combined with each on its own strengths. And we are looking at this moment, for example, with several developers, that we can work out on such business cases, that they make permitted sites, we put our batteries with it, and we combine our business strategies for the future. Tom, if you can go to the next slide, please. And I think that's my last slide. So this was my presentation. I know I got a lot of the time, but I hope we can still have good discussion and answer some questions.
Thank you so much, Lars, and thank you for having the patience with the slides. I'm glad that we did get them on screen. I'd like to invite him then back on screen so that we can have a discussion and answer the questions of the audience. But I would like to kick things off actually with a poll questions to the audience. After having listened in to this conversation, to these two great presentations, how would you answer the following question? And please click. And the question is, moving forward, do you think all new solar projects will have storage integrated in them? So I invite the audience to vote so that we can have an idea of what is their perspective on this topic following these presentations. I'll give them a few more moments. And we think we'll see the results right now. And the results are very 50-50, actually precisely in the halfway range, that moving forward, all new solar projects will have storage integrated in them. So I would like to ask our speakers, what do they think of these results? Is this what you expected to see from the audience?
Well, I don't know if it's what I expected, because I would say to this poll, it's a no, because of the challenges that both I and Lars already elaborated on, that they probably not all will have that. But you can also ask yourself the question, should all new solar projects have batteries integrated with it? And then I have a bit of a double feeling that 50-50%, I think describes it in a good way, is that on the one hand, I always learned that you have to be careful with scarce materials. There's a lot of lithium, cobalt, etc. in batteries. We have to be scarce, or scarce materials. We have to be careful using those in areas where it's not really necessary. On the other hand, and there comes in the necessity, is that we did a study together with all grid operators that we will be needing 28 to 55 gigawatts of battery storage in the future energy system, besides all that extra grid capacity. And that means that we have now 100 megawatts installed of battery storage in the Netherlands. We need to increase that by many folds. So I'm pretty curious, and when do we start? I think we need to start now. We have problems, many problems in the grid, and that we have to start integrating it, but I don't think we should integrate it everywhere.
I see. And perhaps they were inspired by the presentations you both just shared, and they said, yes, they will all have storage, but you have both outlined the challenges very clearly. Lars, how would you have answered that question? Would you also have been more realistic and said no?
I think the word all makes it for me a no, because you really have to look at what kind of solar parks will have energy storage. I don't think it's needed that all have them, but you can also look at solutions where you have some solar parks behind one transformation house, and you can combine that with an energy storage for all of them. Also, the cost of batteries are rather high, so smaller solar parks, it will just not be beneficial to put a battery there. But if you are looking at large-scale solar parks, I think it's not even a should, but a must that they will have energy storage with it to help the grid.
You make a good point on the cost, because we do have an audience question about, in this particular case, it was co-locating storage and wind, but it also goes for co-locating storage and solar. How the question is, it may be good for the grid, but if there is no established market, or if the developer has no economic incentive, why would they do it? I don't know if yes, there's an answer to this question.
That's a very good observation, actually. At this moment, I truly believe that for a solar park, the risk of putting a battery there is just too high if they want to do it themselves. It does not fit in the business model of the solar park itself, where you have a fixed income. And most of the solar parks want to develop and sell it to a pension fund or investment fund, and then it just doesn't make sense, because it is a risk that the pension fund doesn't want to have. And I think there our expertise comes into place. You can split it. We can make use of the same connection, and we can deploy the solar park, or we can deploy the energy park next to it, and combine and look where the opportunities are, that we help the solar park when needed, and we give added value. And then you don't take the risk on the solar park, but you do get the benefits of it.
I see.
And it should be a win-win situation for all.
Mm-hmm. But Haim, I think there's quite a few questions up for the DSO, and I think you pointed out perhaps the chicken and egg problem, where you might need grid stability in order to have batteries, but the battery support grid stability, and which one comes first. But before I let you touch into that, there's a few specific questions here. One of them being, is the DSO allowed to offer non-firm contracts? I don't know if you have an answer to this.
Yeah, so are we allowed? It's a difficult question because these contracts are not already around, and we're discussing that in the energy sector right now. So if you look at how everything is written down, I don't know the exact regulations, but it doesn't enable us to use time frame contracts. The new rules for congestion management at least allow us to make new types of contracts, bilateral contracts with developers, in the sphere of having congestion already and solving that using congestion management. This will become possible in the near term. For the more preventive side, I think that's also a very important side, that we already look at integrating energy storage and other flexible assets, integrating that with solar energy and combining in a smart way. These kind of contracts, I don't expect them to have them around in the next 2 to 3 years, but there's a lot of interest also from the supervisor and from market parties for these types of contracts. And I think in the long run, this will become could become even a standard for integrating flexible assets in a way that they can operate still on different markets, have lower transportation costs in a flexible way that enables flexibility. I think that's where we're heading.
Yes, and Lars commented on how the transportation costs could be a major barrier. We are almost at the end of the time. I think I'll answer one or two questions, but I want to let the audience know that they're very welcome to join the conference later in Amsterdam this month, because both of you will be there, and maybe you'll be able to answer their questions face to face. But before we close this webinar, I'll still ask one other question here we have about what type of subsidy would be suited for hybrid of solar plus battery projects. Is this the kind of subsidy for capex or for fixed revenues? And there's an insight on what would be your ideal makeup for these hybrid projects?
Yeah, I can comment on that. I know that there is a lobby going on for subsidy, and actually there are two, one for capex and one for the income. I think if you look at the income side, that one would actually work better, because then you can also build in a steering mechanism there for the DSOs, that it helps the grid. And for capex, then you don't know how the battery will be deployed, and then actually the first of the fears that Giem was mentioning there can happen, that you are steering against the grid. So if you are putting a subsidy there, then actually that subsidy will be there to pay for the transportation cost. So that's also a way how you can look at it. But if you put a subsidy there, then it should be helping the grid instead of just giving a blunt subsidy to encourage the investment in batteries.
I see.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
If I may add a little to that, I'm also very much against a general subsidy for batteries. As the CE Delft report also shows, it doesn't, in all cases, really save CO2. It doesn't always decrease the required grid capacity, can actually even increase. So it doesn't really always solve grid congestion. And I think a well-designed subsidy that really contains a trigger and incentive to really have the postponed feed-in of solar energy that is the best solution to at least the grid capacity problems that battery storage promises to solve.
I see. It's more nuanced than just a simple subsidy. I think we do still have some time to cover more questions because we do have some good questions here. And I'd like to go on to the next one. To you, Gim, wondering whether there's already a date known for when the new netcode would be released or usable.
No, I think it's not known. The first hopes were that already this year in January this new netcode would be active. The expectations that we have at this moment, so there's not a specific date, but it's in the third quarter. So after the summer or around the summer, this should be active. And at least Leander is already preparing in 4 different areas to gain experience and start this congestion market following already from the IDs that are in these new regulations, so that we don't start too late and we already have experience. We do that in 4 areas, but we are not sure if that's going to be in line with the final design of the entire regulations around congestion management, but at least we try to start as soon as possible.
I see. And here there's another question about what is the request process or request for connection process for batteries? Is it something similar to the solar and wind process where you might have type A to D plants? Or is it still evolving, these procedures?
Well, I think it's already being implemented. That battery storage is incorporated also in the netcode, so it's distinguished as a different technicality, like solar energy is also battery storage. They also try to follow as much because of speed of implementation this RFG that you're referring to for requirements for generators. These processes will be quite similar, and there will be a registration obligation for batteries. We have to know where and which type of batteries are incorporated to the grid to do proper grid planning, and also in emergency situations need to know that. It will be quite a similar process for both.
I see. And Lars, you yourself in your presentation mentioned quite a bit about IT, and there's actually a bit of a question on the specification of how can IT or IoT help in congestion handling or in these battery projects.
Yeah, there are different companies that are looking at steering demand side response, so to say. But if you're looking at the battery and IT for the battery, deploying it in the market, well, if you compare it to a solar park, if there are low prices, you curtail and you just put off the solar park. So that's one way. If you look at the battery, you are every few seconds sending a set point to the battery, whether it will charge or it will discharge or will do nothing. And also you have to build in, you have to look at the temperature of the batteries. So if the temperature increases of the battery, you don't have the power that you have at the optimal temperature. So you also have to look at those kind of things. We have a team of 5 IT people walking around here just to look at optimizations of algorithms and to look at optimization of the battery. And we are at the same time putting approximately 40 simulation batteries at the same time as the Rhino battery to look which battery would have worked the best way out in the market.
I see. Well, I don't know, Kim, do you want to feed off of it?
No, regarding battery operations, I think it's not necessary to comment.
Yeah.
All right, then I would like to perhaps give both of you a chance to provide some key takeaway. What would you like our audience to walk away with? Is there some key message that you'd like to share with them? And also to let our audience know that at the event later this month, there is a discount code available that they could use for having attended this webinar with a 5% discount. And feel free to use this if you'd like to meet him or Lars in person. But I'd like to give you both the floor to see, is there any final message, a key takeaway you'd like to share?
Yeah, my takeaway is actually look for the cooperation and the win-win for all parties.
Yeah, from my side, it would be that Lars already showed a map where all of the Netherlands was almost red. Well, I don't predict it will be fully the same, but this congestion will change in location, and it will stay there for a long time. Even in 10 years, in 20 years, despite all the grid reinforcements, it will stay. So really start thinking differently how to integrate solar energy that just has capacity factor of around 10%, really differently in how to integrate that in the energy system. I think both curtailment and other solutions next to energy storage will play a very, very important role in that.
Well, thank you both so much. I really think that the starting now message is very clear, and that is not without its challenges, but hopefully together with these open conversations, that's a good way to start. And I'll invite our audience to check out more about Lars or him, and hopefully meet each other later this month in Amsterdam. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lorena. And thank you, team.
With that, we close this webinar. All right, good morning to everyone.